in a minute. But first of all, I definitely want to say welcome to everybody who's watching. This is Friday Fat Chat, and I am Ivy Felicia, the body relationship coach. I am the founder of Fat Women of Color, and we created Friday Fat Chat as a part of Fat Women of Color. Fat Women of Color is a community space that provides collective care as well as uh, support for Black and Brown women of size. And so we've been amplifying the voices of Black and Brown women of size for over 3 years now. And we started Friday Fat Chat as a way to create a space where we can hear and share the experiences, um, the wisdom, the insight of Black and Brown women of size, and hear all the different stories because we don't always get to see, seldom get to see on media, the lives and experiences and wisdom of Black and Brown women of size. So that's why we created this platform and this forum. And so before we get into the chat and talking to our featured guest today, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, which is Calabash Tea in Washington, D.C. Calabash. Calabash Tea is a cafe that's been in the Washington, D.C. area for years now. They have two locations. Of course, with COVID, they're still closed, but you can order any of their tea and tonics and coffee and healing goods and sage and all kind of good stuff from them online. So if you go to calabashtea.com, you can order things from them, and then they also give you a discount because you're part of our family. So if you use FWOC, and we'll put that on the screen so that you can see it later if you're watching the recording. If you use FWOC, which is Fat Women of Color, they'll give you a 10% discount. But they're also awesome in that they also donate a part of the proceeds to help support Fat Women of Color and the Friday Fat Chat platform. So we really appreciate them for supporting us and for taking care of us. So now that we took care of our sponsors, I want to do a formal welcome. Tigress has been a follower on Fat Women of Color for years now. And we've been reposting you sometimes, some of your awesome posts. And then you and I connected this year as you made some shifts business wise for you, which we'll get into that. And so we invited you to be on the platform because you're doing amazing things with the fat community as well, especially this month. So welcome, Tigress.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Hi, all the fat women of color and all the allies.
Yes. And if you are watching live, if you happen to be watching live, if you type in the chat, we can see it. We can still see you, even though we're on a different platform today. So if you have questions or comments or anything you want to share with us, just drop that in the chat and we can pick that up from you. But Tigress, let's start out with getting to know Tigress a little bit. So tell us a little bit about you and where you're from. Um, Also, for people who don't know you, all any intersectionalities, how you identify, all of that.
All of that. Well, I grew up in Arizona, so I'm here outside of Phoenix, in Chandler, Arizona, and I grew up here. I went away to college as the first in my family to go to college to Smith College in Massachusetts, which was my first of two women's colleges. I'm really proud to be a women's college grad. And my second women's college was Mills College in Oakland. I am I lived for most of my adult life in the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area, and that's really where my activism was shaped.
Go ahead.
Um, that's really where my activism was shaped in the San Francisco Oakland area. There's a thriving fat community there. There's lots of fat activist history of key people in the organized activist movement, events that happen there. So it's just sort of like in the air in the Bay that that fat activism pervades other kinds of activism more than it does in some other places. And so I spent most of my professional career as an educator, and I worked with first generation to college students at the Mills Upward Bound program, and then I worked as the diversity director of an independent school in Oakland for 9 years. And so I was talking to young people all the time about all of these like social justice and equity issues. I'm mixed race Black. I identify as Black first. But for anybody who's listening to the show and not seeing it, the visual description is I'm a middle-aged, fat, Black mixed race woman with dark curly hair and black glasses and a low-cut dress, sitting in my usual broadcast space in front of some of my Black art and in front of my NAFA logos. I know we're going to talk about NAFA in a little bit. But anyway, so like I was working with students of color at Upward Bound, and then I was working with predominantly white student population at the private school, but I was there for the students of color and the students who were marginalized in other ways. So I was doing all this diversity work, but I was also like sort of shifting in my personal life, and I had not been a nightlife person at all in my younger years or my 20s. And then in my 30s, I started going out to clubs. And of course, I'm the fat girl in the club, right? And I had heard about BBW parties, big, beautiful women parties, but I had never been to one. And the first time I went to a party called Big Boogie Nights in the Bay, it was like, oh, okay, people just come as they are in the bodies that they're in, and they're in all the bodies in here. And so for a few months, maybe almost a year, I was going there. There was a new plus size party that also opened in the Bay called Sexy at Every Size. And so I was going to these parties, and I was enjoying the openness of people accepting lots of different bodies, but I wasn't feeling as warm of a welcome as a Black woman. There was a warm welcome for Black men at those parties, but I wasn't feeling as warm of a welcome as a Black woman. And I knew if I wasn't feeling that as a light-skinned mixed Black woman who, doesn't present in ways that people associate with hood or whatever, like, I'm pretty palatable to a lot of people until they start hearing me talk about race, but then I'm not always as palatable to them. But on first glance, they assume I'm going to be palatable to them. And if even I wasn't welcome, then I knew it really wasn't welcoming for the other sisters, right? And so I was complaining about that a lot at home, and my roommate finally said, why don't you just start something? And so I did. I started a plus size nightclub event called Full Figure Entertainment, and I led with a focus on women of color. So in all my marketing materials, in who I reached out to on MySpace, because it was back in those days, and I made a statement. We had a mission and value statement, and one of the values was we are unapologetically centering people of color in this environment. So and it was a hip hop party in Oakland, and so, but, because I was doing all that diversity work stuff by day, so now I'm like a high school teacher by day and and a nightclub promoter by night. And because I was doing all that diversity kind of stuff, equity kind of discussions with my students all the time and with the faculty and staff in the places that I was working, it was really important to me as a nightclub promoter that even though my first objective had to be to throw a hot party, I also had to have an objective about like community building, that we're here for each other, and we're here for fat people. And so I really saw the club as like, we're not going to talk about fat politics on the dance floor, but I am going to talk about that on Facebook, and I am going to invite y'all to other things that are happening in fat community. And so that was really where I started to get to know the other things that were happening in fat community in the Bay and try to really support those things.
I love it. Like, I think that's one of the things that I enjoyed. We talked one-on-one, and that's one of the things I really enjoyed about you, is that we had that similarity and that passion for creating community for fat people. And it's just interesting how it just kind of happened naturally for you, where you saw the need. It's like, wait a minute, there's a need here. And then it just grew. Because I think that's how it happens, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. for people who are thinking about creating community for fat people, because we definitely need more. There more spaces are starting to pop up now, which is awesome and it's beautiful. But for maybe people who are sitting with it and thinking, I want to do something for fat people, right? I think that sometimes you can overthink it and think, oh,
Mhm.
I have to have all of this together and all this in line, which those things are great. But listening to your story, it was just, I saw a need, I started doing something, and I just took steps along the way.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Um, I didn't have any experience as a nightclub promoter. I barely had experience going to clubs. I had, not been going out that long. I mean, I was an observer when I went out. And I had a couple of people around me, especially the roommate that I had at the time, who knew nightlife a lot better than me and who knew DJs and other promoters and stuff. So that helped. But one of the things I did was those two clubs that I mentioned, I reached out to both of them and said, can I sit down with you and have like an informational conversation? Will you share your best tips with me? And both of them, both of the organizers of both of those clubs were really generous with me in that way. um and and my whole thing was like, I mean, we can have friendly competition, that's cool, but like, I'm actually trying to provide another alternative. I'm not trying to be up against you on the same night so I can steal your clients, because that doesn't make more alternatives for fat people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, I made it a point when I was running my club, especially in the early years of my club, to go to everybody else's stuff. Whether I felt like going out that night or not, I was at everybody else's party all the time. Just to be that example of like, we are all in community together. We are all here. That's not, you know, that's my competitor, but that's not really my competitor, because there's enough space out here for all of it. There are 45 mainstream clubs popping off tonight, and
Right.
there's us, right? So if we can't have two and we're not even on the same night, then we're really not doing it right. And so it was harder to maintain that over the years. There's drama. It's club life, right? People are drinking, people are looking for people to have, romance and sex with and all the things, and there's drama. And so it was harder to maintain that over the years. But I was really committed to maintaining it, and that helped stretch it a lot longer than some of the relationships between some of the other clubs across the country. So I was really proud of that. But that's what I did. Like, I just called up people who knew more than me and said, hey, can I get some advice from you? And then I just kind of jumped in. Was that the best business model? No. And
Right.
I never consistently, I mean, I had a handful of parties that actually, broke even or made a little bit of money at the door. I was mostly funding my party out of my day job because I didn't have a business model. So, I mean, if you're thinking about this as an entrepreneur, I would suggest that you get some mentoring for somebody who has more business acumen than I had. But I had
Mm-hmm.
community building acumen. There are folks, and one of the things that I'm most proud of is like, I love looking at the pictures from my club days, and like, it's a bunch of hot big girls not apologizing for what they're wearing. You got, and there are people that some of your viewers might be familiar with, like Saucy West, who is, a really popular supersized model. She started modeling for my nightclub.
Oh,
And I'm
wow.
I'm really proud of that, but I'm even more proud of the way she shows up as an activist than the way,
Mm-hmm.
the way she represents supersized women in her modeling career. And like, I can't take credit for all of that, but it was the entry place for her,
Mm-hmm.
and there were other people like that, somebody who came to um one of the girls so I had a team of models called the FFE models. Full Figure Entertainment was the name of the club. And I started pulling people out of the crowd, and then eventually we had a couple of model searches, because it was really important to me. I was looking at other clubs across the country. The plus size clubs were all using, stock art photos of plus models.
Mm-hmm.
And, first of all, plus models aren't even always visibly fat.
Right. Right.
um, and also most of the time they were white girls.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time they were not people who were going to be at that party. And so I was really committed to, like, I want to show people who are actually going to be here. This is what it
Yeah.
looks like when you come here. And what it looks like is, it's a very Black and brown party.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple times when there were folks, who were who modeled for us as guests or as part of the team who were not Black and brown, but the vast majority was.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of our team was Black women and brown women. And you know, that was really important to me, both in terms of like sort of visibility activism, but also because that's what I need. You know, I you know, like I said, I want to bring my crew to the other club. I'm not interested in being exotified by men because I'm mixed. So that element of going to other clubs and having dudes come at me like that was a hard no for me. And also, like, I understand that you know, my skin tone comes with privilege in lots of ways, but that is a hard no for me. I'm not interested. It's disrespectful to my other sisters. I don't want it. Get, you know, back up. And then, you know, and then I also, you know, I want my you know, darker brown and Black sisters to have folks looking at them if they want to be looked at. Men, women, people of other genders, whoever. And
it's
and,
about,
you know,
like, redefining, like, what I hear you saying is like redefining the narrative.
Yeah.
Because, like, it sounds like the narrative, especially for like curvy and plus size, was usually like what you were seeing was the stock photos, white women. Of course, this is, you know, we talk about this all the time. People who are, you know, have the hourglass shape, maybe not the most realistic thing. And it sounds like you wanted to create something, like, to redefine the narrative of what it meant to show something different and for people to see something different and more realistic about the actual fat Black and brown people that were actually in the streets, that your next door neighbors, you're going to see on the bus, at the grocery store, whatever.
That's right, because we come in all these shades and all these hairstyles and all these shapes and sizes. And, you know, in the BBW nightlife world of the Bay, at the time I entered it, that wasn't being represented. And, you know, there had been some previous clubs that had been, you know, that had been more of a mix or more Black and brown, but they weren't operating at the time. And in other parts of the country, you know, like I think of Bab's BBW, which is a bash that's a predominantly Black bash. The bashes are sort of like multi-day party conventions for big folks. And, you know, and I know there were places in Atlanta, and I know that in at Goddesses in New York, the crowd was mixed differently. I think, you know, sometimes at Bounce in Long Beach, the crowd was mixed differently. So everything didn't look like what I was seeing in the Bay, but that's where I was. That's where I was going to party. You know, I'm not going to Atlanta to party this weekend. I'm partying here in Oakland. So I'm either partying within folks, or I'm partying in a fat party where there's not a lot of other people that look like me and my friends. And I was a smaller big girl then than I am now, but I was thinking about things like, you know, can my friend with the hips negotiate this space? You know?
And most people don't think about that, like when they create spaces for fat people, because it's one thing to think of it in theory, right? But when you're actually thinking about if fat bodies are going to navigate this space, and this is for people, again, who might be thinking about creating community or thinking about creating events, activities that you really want to be fat positive and to be fat inclusive, and not even fat positive, fat inclusive, let's say center fat people, you actually have to think about fat bodies navigating that space. And that means chairs, like you said, that means, like, you know, all
it
the
means
other
bathroom stalls, it means the hallways, it means all of the things. You know, when I got started, when I was getting started and I was looking for a venue, I remember a friend suggesting something, and I said, that's not going to work because the traffic flow is not going to work with big bodies. And she thought I meant the traffic outside, and I was like, I don't know why you think I meant that we are so fat we're going to stop cars in the street. That's not what I was saying. What I was saying is, this club is about this wide, so two of us can't pass by each other in this club. Two of you can, you know, because she was a tall, willowy woman, but like, two of you can, but two of us cannot. And even things like, you know, even things like how your photographer works. I would see these, I would see photographs from, you know, other nightclubs, and they would have like 6 or 7 little women in a picture together. And then you see, you know, see us, the photographer got to back up to get 6 of us because we're literally wider, and there's no, there's no shade to that. It's just part of the practicals. And so, you know, you had asked earlier, like if people want to start something, some of those logistic things you do have to consider. You know, the pieces about like, is your graphic design on your flyers good enough? Or, you know, where are you advertising it? Like those pieces you can, it's amazing if you have a plan for, and if you have folks with experience who can help guide you through that, but you can stumble through that, right? If you can get people to your fat pool party, then they're not going to be remembering that, you know, you had a beach ball on the flyer instead of a fat, right? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You're going to get there with those things eventually. But things like, can the largest person who come to your party fit the bathroom stall?
Yeah.
You have to think about things like that. And the place where I made the biggest error in that era is in that area is that we had, you know, we were having parties in San Francisco and Oakland and various places, and I had a venue shut down on me at the last minute. Like they had sold the venue and not told me, and the new owner wanted the keys, and we had like 2 days to move this party. We just moved it to some place where the DJ had a hookup, and I didn't think through all the things I normally thought through, and I didn't think through the stairs, you know? And so that's an accessibility issue. I wasn't thinking about it because it was like, well, I never see people with mobility devices in the club. Well, maybe they're not in the club because club promoters don't think about making space for them in the club, right?
Right.
And when I moved back to, you know, some of the venues I was working with in Oakland, I did have, you know, folks in wheelchairs or on scooters come to the club, not often, but they could come, right?
Right.
And it was really difficult because that venue, it's a venue called Asia SF in San Francisco with Basement Club, it was a gay owned venue. It was the largest employer of trans women in the country. They have a dinner show there, and you know, it was a locally owned, like they had all of these selling points, and they were amazing as hosts to us. And there were times when if we didn't have the party there, we weren't going to have a party. But if I had to do it again, I might just keep looking for another venue so we had that accessibility for big knee stuff, for, you know, folks who need, you know, canes or other mobility devices, whatever.
And that's what, like, I didn't mean to cut you off, but for those who are watching, like, these are the things that when we're talking about, because this is a fat centered platform, that it literally means reprogramming your mind and reprogramming your focus to center fat people, right? Because we don't even realize how much we are conditioned for fat people to be on the margins and to think, and even sometimes when we think of ourselves as fat people, to be thought of, you know, as an afterthought, or maybe not even thought of at all, and to be invisible, right? And for things to just be uncomfortable for us, or for us not to have options, or for things to not be accommodating. And so even if you are not creating a space that is for a fat function or a fat event, if you have a venue, an event, if you are creating things for people, these are things you can start to think about. Like, is your space truly inclusive? Is your space truly welcoming to people of all different types of body experiences? And sometimes that does, you know, as people who host, we know this, that sometimes that does mean that it's going to add to the cost, or it's going to add to the work that you have to do. But if you are committed to really being diverse, right, and making sure that anyone who walks through the door feels welcome, then these are things you can start to think about and start to focus on when you're creating spaces for people.
That's right. And some of the things don't have, you know, it doesn't have to cost money to move a table so that the space is a little wider for people to
There
get
you
through,
go.
right? It has to cost money for a venue to do something like put in an elevator so that it's accessible downstairs.
Right.
And maybe it has to cost you more money to go to a different venue because of that. You know, like I
Mm,
said, we ended up there without me thinking about it. And then once we were there and had relationship with them, it was hard to leave them because of all of those other, you know,
mm,
equity kinds of and diversity kinds of ways that they were one of the best venues to be working with. But it was an old historic building, and they didn't have a plan for any kind of, upgrades to accessibility. So it wasn't even one of those situations where we could say, well, we do it here every once in a while. And we were still doing parties in Oakland at that time too. So, we had other parties that folks could come to, but it wasn't even one of those situations where we could say, well, it's like this now, but we're working on it. Because they weren't going to be working on it because they weren't legally bound to. And so we were working on it by looking for other venues. Right. But, that relationship with that club, we had a lot of great parties there. I'm really grateful for them. I'm really grateful that we were able to support this, this queer owned business. And also, if I had to do it now, I would wait a month or two longer, or I would seek funders to help me find a place where I could put down a deposit, even though it was more expensive or whatever, because that accessibility piece is important. I mean,
to do the extra work, it's worth it.
It's worth it. It means that people can come. And, I was at an event with another promoter who said, and I'm just going to trigger warn this because it's really nasty. We were at one of the bashes. We were just hanging out, and he said, I mean, is this even going to affect your club at home though? Like you don't want all of these disabled people and scooter people to come to your club. And I said, actually, I do. And he just seemed confused by that. But I'm like, you don't think somebody can dance on their scooter? Like, or, whatever. And so,
I mean, people like that, it's not that they don't think, they really just don't care, because that's not even the world they live in.
Right. Well, and, and to be real, a lot of the male promoters that I was seeing at the time were, they were in it for community to a certain extent, but they were also in it for, shopping for their dates. And I wasn't in it for shopping for my dates. I just had a different agenda. I think that, I really wanted people to think we were the hottest party, but I also, I think I was the only club in the country at the time that had a mission and value statement. And that included, supporting size acceptance activism, which is, the term I would have used in 2008. Now I would say fat liberation activism. But, supporting activism, being color inclusive with no apologies for centering Black and brown people, being LGBTQ inclusive, because even though I knew I was attracting a predominantly heterosexual crowd, I don't want you to feel like you can't be here, whoever you are. Right. And, just all of those things were like, I documented that this is what we're going to be trying to do behind the scenes. And it just made a big deal to me.
It makes a difference. Like what I hear you saying, and I do want to talk about this too, is like when you're doing community work, right? And what you're talking about is like you created your clubs, and kind of moving into talking about community work. It makes a difference when you are intentional, right? Because it's different to say, oh, I just want to put something together and I just want people to come and I just want to like kind of make money or whatever. But if you really want to make sure that you're making a change, you're inciting change, you're creating social change, you're redefining the narrative, then it requires that you be intentional, right? And part of being intentional, it sounds like what you did was that you actually sat down and said, okay, these are the people that I want to censor. These are the people that we want to serve. These are the people that we want to make sure feel comfortable in this space. And you have to be intentional about that, because if not, then you'll default back to that social narrative, which talking about like white supremacy, ableism supremacy, all these other things where we don't realize that sometimes that's internalized. So even when we create from a space of centering white people, centering able-bodied people, centering heterosexual people,
and censoring thin people. I mean, one of the things that I saw, with other clubs, and when I said before that I started with this great relationship with the other clubs where I was going all the time to their parties and stuff, and I had to bow out of that relationship with one of those clubs because the owners went on Weight Watchers, which is their right to do. Right. But they began to talk about weight publicly in a way that I was like, how are you taking money from fat people, but you talking about fat people like this? Right. It's
that
not
goes back to the intention.
That's right. And I made a post on Facebook one time about losing 250 pounds in one weekend. And what I meant was like my dude left. And
Mhm.
to me, it's really obvious. I did not lose 250 pounds in one weekend. I would be at my birth weight, at least back then. And, but and one of those, and another promoter came on my post, and because I had started the post with the phrase something like, I don't normally like to see weight loss posts on Facebook, but I lost 250 pounds this week and I was being a smartass. And this other promoter came on the post and said, no, we should see more talk about weight loss, because even though we want to party together as fat people, we all know we're not healthy and we should be talking about that. And I was like, no, actually, that's not what I'm going to be doing as a nightclub promoter. So,
Mhm.
some of the same people who thought like it was inappropriate of me to be talking about like more social justice kind of things all the time, because that's not what the party is about, they were 100% cool with talking about weight loss stuff. Well, that's not what the party is about either. I didn't come in here to get low to Weight Watchers. I came in here to get low, right? And so I didn't come to I had to watch y'all get low. I never been great at that. But I'm just, like, so even people who were like very much purists about, we can't talk about the civil rights aspects of being fat because that's just not what we do as party people.
Mhm.
Okay, but you can talk about how you're selling Herbalife though. That's not what we do as party people either. So you'll bend that there, you
Mhm.
know and you'll keep taking money from fat people even as you become evangelized about your weight loss. You'll keep taking money from the other fat people. It just
Mm.
wasn't okay with me. um you know like I said, people's weight loss is their personal business, but I like to something Marilyn Wan says. Marilyn Wan is a longtime fat activist, and she often says, I don't care what you weigh, I care how you talk about weight.
Mm.
And it was like that for me. I had other promoters ask me like, well, would you consider selling diet ads at your club? No. They're like, but some people want that. Yeah, they can get that in 100 million other places. This should be the place where they come and don't have that.
That's
I had
safe.
somebody I had somebody sneak in one time. Well, she came in kind of under the radar, handing out flyers for an arts event or something like that. But the backside of the flyer was for body shapers. Girl, we gonna pick
Mm.
all these up off the bar and either give them back to you or put them in the trash. Because people can wear body shapers if they want to, but we're not going to be in here promoting a message that they should.
I
That's
don't think that people realize when they do that well, no, let me reframe that. I think people don't care. It's very it exploits, right? Because it happens in fat spaces. So when you gather fat people, then people who seek to promote, to sell, to any all the things you're talking about will exploit those spaces, and they don't care that they're exploiting people. They don't care about the actual people, like you're saying. They don't care about the people in the space. They just care about the green that they're going to get out of it, or that they could potentially get out of it. And I think, again, for people who are thinking about curating those spaces or who are curating fat spaces, this is something else that you have to think about. What does it look like to create a space that is actually safe and affirming for fat people? Because also part of your responsibility is to make sure that you are aware and you're alert that people are going to do this, right? Like
yeah.
this happens in predominantly fat spaces where people want to exploit the fatness any way they can, and they will try to leverage money, of course, and uh also like popularity and all those kind of things to try to say, oh, we just want to, we want to promote, we want to whatever, but really, no, you want to exploit.
Yeah, and I think even when people don't have malicious intentions or self-serving intentions or greedy intentions or whatever, their anti-fatness is so pervasive in our culture that it shows up in ways that we don't even realize until it's there, and that some of the people around us still don't realize because they don't stop and think about it. So like I said, before, we had you know, we had this modeling troupe, which meant we were doing photo shoots all the time. And I had, you know, I had a new model who was just getting to know us, and she brought with her a designer that she works with. And, you know, we are getting ready to take the picture, and the designer shouts, "Okay, suck it in, ladies." Now, you want to stand tall and in your power and in your body for a beautiful photo. Suck it in does not have to be part of that, right? Because suck it in means we don't want all this belly out. Reduce your belly as much as you can, because we only want to show the right kind of curves, right? We're not doing that. I had a Photoshop, a note, like not really a no Photoshop policy, because I'm going to do things like, oh, you were turned a weird way and that created something you don't have, you know, or like you shadow, or, you know, something looks weird, your earring is turned sideways. Like, we're going to fix some things in these pictures. We're not going to do no, you know, no hashtag, no filter on everything that we put out on our marketing materials. But what I'm not going to do is make your arms smaller. You know, what I'm not going to do is make this look like you don't have any roles when I know you have roles. And so, you know, so it was things like that. We, you know, the models.
So can you tell us, Tigress, like, what does it look like? Because I want to make sure that we're conscious of our viewers and like making sure that they're learning from this too.
Yes.
Can you tell us, like, when it comes to having things like this, right? And picking photographers. We have talked about this on another episode, because people don't know. They think, okay, I just need a photographer. So they go down Facebook, Instagram, whatever, look for a photographer, find somebody that they can afford, hire that person, and then that person comes in and the experience is nothing like what you want it to be, because you don't realize that not every photographer knows how to work with fat bodies. So when it comes to things like this, right? So picking vendors, picking photographers, what are some tips on how people can pick photographers, pick vendors that are going to be, I don't like the term fat positive, but that are going to center fat bodies and understand how to work with fat bodies?
I mean, I think it's the most important thing is that you have those conversations. You need people to know who they're dealing with, in terms of the physicality of the space. You know, I had a venue tell me that they would only take my party if I made this huge deposit, because they'd had a fat thing there before and somebody broke one of their chairs, right? Okay, well, but if you'd had some other kind of party and somebody broke a chair, would you be like, oh, we're never having white people again because we had a white event and one of those people broke my chair? Like, you would never, right?
Good point.
But it was like, but it's like when you have those kinds of conversations, when you make sure people know this is the population that I am working with, then if they have whatever biases they have, they can work out with you. So you are not responsible for putting other people in front of those biases, right? So if you know, if I know that that's how that restaurant owner behaves, and if something happens in here, she's going to blame the fat people, then maybe I don't want to do this with her, because I can do this with some other business owner who's not going to universalize everything that happens with fat people as a problem that is because of their fat, right? So, but because you are honest, if you just go in like, I'm trying to have a brunch for some girlfriends, and you don't tell the people that your girlfriends are this wide and not this wide, right? Then you've set yourself up for that a little bit. I think that you know, there are some things that you're not going to know until it happens. And if you're going to try to do any kind of event planning, fat centered, POC centered, you know, and it doesn't just have to be nightlife. And as you know, I don't do nightlife anymore. So I have to think about these things in other settings. You know, you're going to make mistakes sometimes. You're going to do everything you can to get it right. You know, we had our NAFA convention, our 50th anniversary convention, at a hotel where we spent, you know, hours with the management. My colleagues on the board went and walked the hotel. I went to Vegas and walked the hotel. Everything was great in terms of accessibility. And then when we got there, they had the accessible bathrooms locked. We didn't know until the first person went to go try to use the bathroom, and it was locked, and we had to wait 15 minutes for somebody to come open it. So you can do all of your due diligence, and there will still be times when things will come up, either because you didn't think of them or because it's out of your hands. You know, but if the folks who trust you know that you did your due diligence, not only are you going to feel better about that when it happens, they're going to feel better about it when it happens. We
Yeah.
all know the discriminations that we face in, in Black and brown bodies, in fat bodies, in disabled bodies. We know the discriminations we face. It's hurtful and disappointing if they come up in places where we thought we were going to be safe.
That's
Um,
really good. That's true. That's very
it's
true.
it's true, and it's almost doubly hurtful because we thought we were going to be safe here.
Yeah.
This has historically been, I know you probably want to shift away from some of the nightlife stuff. That the nightlife is where I started, but when you look at fat activism, historically, the organized, documented fat activist movement that started in the late 60s had some ways where it was incredibly empowering and incredibly inclusive, and other ways where it suffered from the same things as those early BBW parties I was going to. Like, oh, okay, I could be here, but I can only be here if I keep myself in the shadows to a certain point. There was an attitude in a lot of early fat activism, and the founder of NAFA will own this now, because now, after 50 some years in the movement, he has learned to be more intersectional in his thinking, and is genuinely, I believe that he is genuine in trying to make up for some of that. But he'll own this, that in the early days of NAFA, their attitude was sort of like, but this is about fat people, so why would we be talking about race or gender or these other things? That's good. Y'all do that activism too, but right here we focus on this. And that doesn't really work for people with multiple marginalized identities. If I show up as the fat brown person, the fat, the fat not heterosexual person, the fat that did a little bit better with disability, but not as well as they think they did. If I show up and I have one of those other marginalizations, and you're like, let's all hold hands and be fat together. Okay, but security stopped me on the way in here because of what I look like. Can you not ask me to not talk about that? And
Right.
so there's these ways in which one of the things I would encourage people to be conscious of if they're thinking about event planning for fat communities is to be thinking about intersectionality and the way that fat folks who are not privileged in some other areas of their lives, they don't have racial privilege, they don't have wealth privilege, they don't have, they're not heterosexual, like whatever. If you're not thinking about those people too, then stop calling your shit fat community shit. Because
Yeah.
that's fat white people stuff, or that's fat heteronormative stuff, or that's, fat able-bodied stuff. If you are seriously interested in the liberation of fat people, then you have to think about how the fat people who have other ways they are unliberated also need to have experience freedom. And what is your
Yeah.
role, right?
And I
You
know
know,
things that you talk about is because I want to make sure that we also get to the other things. I know one of the
yeah,
things that you wanted to talk about is um cross pollination of the different segments, right, of being
yeah,
fat, and how there's sort of like people in different pockets. I know that one of the things you mentioned when you were kind of talking earlier was that when you there were other clubs, right? And you made sure that, oh, I'm going to make sure that I'm trying not to plan on the same night that they are, that I show up for their stuff, and support them. And I think that personally, working in the fat activism, fat liberation space, that it would be awesome if we could do more of that. I'm not saying
mm-hmm.
that it does or doesn't happen, but I think that it would be good if we could do more of that consciously and intentionally, where we, connect with it. You and I have talked about this, right? We connect with each other, fat leaders in different spaces, whether it's fashion, fitness, activism, dating, whatever. That's everything that fat people are doing, and connect with leaders in that space and say, okay, what
Mm-hmm.
are you doing? What do you have going on? How can I show up to your thing? How can I support your thing? How can I amplify your thing? And then there's reciprocity in that as well. I know
Yeah.
that that's really important to you. I'd love to hear from you about that as well.
It's really important to me. I think sometimes we're really siloed in different areas of fat community. So, we know the other folks in, like you said, in fashion, we know the other folks in nightlife, we know the other folks in art and dance, but we don't, like you said, we don't cross pollinate those communities often
Mhm.
enough. I think that was one of the things that made me different too than other nightclub promoters in a lot of ways, and that led to me doing more activism, was
Mm,
that I because we wanted to be a fashion forward club, and because we had the models that I was talking about who were often finding their ways into modeling in other plus size fashion kind of situations, then I had a foot in both of those worlds. And then
mm,
at other times I had a foot in the activist world and the nightlife world. And then we did some performing at one of the local dance shows, and now we have a foot in the arts world. And one of the girls who modeled for me went on to become a dancer in the dance troupe that hosts that show, and it expanded her activism. The thing is, wherever people come into fat community is not necessarily where they want to stay in fat community, or where they're going to
that's the
be
point.
it's not necessarily going to be their best space, right?
I love
My
that.
nightclub wasn't the best place for everybody. NAFA, the organization that I chair now, is not the best place for everybody. But if that's the place where you come in, how are we all exposing each other to other spaces so that
Mm,
you can find the place where you really thrive? Because this work is going to be done in a lot of different kinds of ways.
yeah.
There's no one right and only way to do fat activism. I'm
Hmm.
going to say the I'm going to say the only thing that is required in all fat activism is intersectionality. If you're not
Mm,
doing that, you are not doing it right, period. But um but other than that, right? Visibility is activism. So if you're doing things that put your fat body out in the world for other people to see you unapologetically, you are doing activism. If you're
hmm.
doing advocacy for people in fat communities, I think about I so greatly admire Fat Rose, and it was one of the organizations that's based in California but has members all over the US that did all of this work around vaccine access for large body people in California, right?
Mm,
And Flair, the Fat Legal Rights and Advocacy Project, that has spent years doing advising fat people on things that come up related to their civil rights that might have legal repercussions. Like that kind of advocacy, everybody's not a lawyer, everybody can't do that, right?
yeah.
Everybody's not a street activist, everybody's not going to get out in front of a building with a protest sign, but there is something that everybody can do. And
Mm,
when we are respectful of how the other folks are doing it and appreciative of what other folks are bringing to the dialogue and to the movement, then we're more likely to be informing each other's stuff
mm.
with the perspectives that we don't have ourselves,
I love
right?
that. And you
So,
don't see one as more valuable than the other. And I think that I've seen that happen too, not necessarily intentionally, but it's like, oh, this isn't important, but this is more important. Like, oh, activism is more important than fashion. And maybe, like fashion is more important than fitness. And no, like you're saying, I love, 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 love how you described it, that people might come in to the community in one way, but there might be something that they're really like passionate about that really resonates with them differently. And
yeah,
like having all these different forms of fat offerings, right? The more different types of fat offerings that we have, the more resources we're giving people, and the more fat people can thrive. And I really love the way that you describe that. There doesn't, and the fact that you said that there's no like right or wrong way to do it, as long as we're making sure that we're respecting people's multiple their intersections and their identities and all of that. But nobody's fat work is more important than the other person's fat work.
I mean, we have to be. There certainly are, as we kind of talked about earlier, there are, the wolves in sheep's clothing, right? Like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm here for fat liberation, and like, nah, you're actually here because you sell these diet shakes. Like,
Right.
that is not like, you're not. We don't count you in the everybody. You're not part of this everybody. The everybody is the folks who are truly interested in fat liberation, and we all have our, again, anti-fatness is so incredibly pervasive in our culture.
Yeah.
It shows up everywhere. I can't do something like, I fell in love with Star Trek a few years ago, and I was looking at some Star Trek memes, and it's like, I can't even get through these Star Trek memes without there being fat jokes in the Star Trek memes. It's literally everywhere.
Yeah.
And we've internalized it. And even as somebody who's been in the movement for a long time, there are still moments when it comes up for me in a personal way, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this thing is happening to me. It must be because I'm too fat. I don't have access to this thing. I need to lose weight. I have a set of counter narratives that help me in those moments so that I don't just go down that rabbit hole of sort of self-abuse about my weight. So that is something that I have gained from fat liberation movement, is that set of talking points to talk back to those inner voices. To the outer voices, I have an easy response, right? But like, to the inner voices, it's that's a little more tender and vulnerable, and it's hard to do that sometimes. We all still have our personal things, and there are folks who are going to make the choice to change their bodies because they think that's the right choice for their health. As a fat activist, I'm going to ask you to question whether or not you have to change your body to achieve the health goals that you want to, or whether you're just using health as the explanation that's more acceptable to some people because really you just want to get back in the jeans you wore in high school or whatever. Like, sometimes people are actually thinking about their health and new diagnoses or things that they're worried about their bodies, and sometimes health is just the like, it's not cool anymore to just say you want to be skinny, but I want to be skinny, right? So like but the thing is, like, as an activist, I'm going to ask you to question the narratives around health. But those are really pervasive narratives, and before people get to that point, sometimes they're going to make choices, to make change. And again, everyone has body autonomy. You're allowed to do that, but the way you talk about how you're doing that, even if you are whatever your motivations for making change, if you talk about that in ways that further marginalize other people, then we can't be down with you.
Yeah.
We can't be down with you until you get that together. I have one person in my life who is an amazing example of owning the ways that weight loss has given her more privilege, and trying to utilize that privilege to support other people who are not going to, don't want to, can't lose weight. And understanding that there are some spaces she shouldn't be in anymore because it's triggering for other folks to have her there. And so she doesn't go in those spaces anymore because she recognizes that she's earned privilege in other ways. And one of the costs of that is this safe space feels different with you in it now, right? And whether you agree with that or not, I so deeply respect that she is that thoughtful about it. Because a lot of people, even if they think they're not being malicious to other fat people in talking about their own weight loss, they allow everybody else to be malicious to other fat people, And so the like, you look so good, how did you do it narrative turns into, I don't have your willpower, I'm not as good as you, I'll never, and then it becomes a really toxic dialogue. So like, when I say there's no wrong way to do it, I mean, those ways are wrong because you're not really doing it. If you're committed to this, you're going to work really hard. If you're committed to fat liberation, you're going to work really hard to make sure your language and the environments that you create are liberatory for fat people. And if they are not, you're going to make changes to that. And if you're not doing that, you're not committed to fat liberation. Every fat space is not a fat liberation space, is not a fat activist space. And, I know, you mentioned fashion. I know that sometimes is one of the critiques of fashion. Like, well, y'all ain't talking about anything. Well, y'all don't have to be talking about anything. I came here to see these clothes.
Yeah.
But if what's happening in the dressing room in the background is, oh, I have to get snatched before I can put this dress on, or, oh, well, we only brought one dress that fits you, the other models are going to have 3 outfit changes, but sorry, like, then that's not a liberatory situation.
Yeah.
And so, it's fat centered, but it's not necessarily fat liberation centered. And so
that brings so much, like, just you said it in that way, I feel like it brings so much clarity because I think that people don't think of it in that way. And I think people do kind of pick on the fashion part of of the plus size or fat community sometimes. I feel like, oh, that's not really activism. But I love that you brought clarity there around what it can look like to do
Yeah.
fashion in a liberated way and to be, again, back to the word, intentional
Yes.
about how you do it.
Yeah, because if your basis is liberatory politics, when I say there's no wrong way to do it, what I mean is you can apply those liberatory politics in a lot of different kinds of settings and through a lot of different kinds of methods.
I love
If
that.
your shit ain't liberatory, then I'm not necessarily saying you're doing it wrong, but you're doing something else.
Yeah.
You're just doing something else, and that's fine. Again, like when I had the party, we partied at the party. I wasn't on the microphone at the party like, hey everybody, happy Fat Liberation Month, let me tell you about these webinars that we're doing. It would have been happy Fat Liberation Month, here's Pam the Funkstress, let's go. And and then in my newsletter or my emails or my Facebook, I would have told you about those other things, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that, I'm not, yeah, every fashion show doesn't have to have a political break where we talk about
Yeah.
the politics of fashion, but fashion is really political. And I think people belittle that a lot. I think,
Yeah.
first of all, in addition to the beautiful and wonderful ways fashion helps us express ourselves, when we have access to fashion that helps us express ourselves, there are also accessibility issues around fashion. When we
Mhm.
think about fat activism and the needs of people in our community, and we know that some of those needs involve things like fat people are discriminated against in hiring and in promotions once they have jobs. If part of that is from a stereotype of you being seen as unprofessional, and you can't come into your job review in a professional outfit because one is not available in
Mhm.
your size, that's an access issue,
Yeah.
right? That's not trivial, that's not superficial, that's affecting your, now that's capitalism, and there's a whole critique of whether you should have to have the right outfit to get a raise for the job that you are doing well. That's a
Right.
whole critique of its own. But the fact is, that is the world we live in. if you
Right.
if you are in danger of losing your children because you are fat and Child Protective Services thinks you can't be a good parent because you're fat, you need to be dressed well when you go to that meeting.
Mhm.
you know um because and that's just, that might be unfair, but that's the way it is. And so the fashion pieces are more than just like, is my outfit fire? Is my outfit going to get me fired?
Yeah.
you know and
Yeah.
and
I
and
love the
so
clarity on that. That I love, like that you're bringing in the clarity on like maybe how people are thinking about these different parts of the different communities that that fatness can be expressed and how fatness can show up in different ways, and it can still be very valid and very important and still incite change and still help redefine the narrative. I want to, because we're running out of time, I want to make
yeah.
sure that you get a chance to talk about, before we wrap up, what you're doing with NAFA and what NAFA is and how people can get involved with NAFA, and also find you and all the activism and things that you have going on.
Yeah, so NAFA, for folks who don't know, is the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, and it was started in 1969 by Bill Fabry, and uh, and and for, at many points, especially in the sort of pre-internet era, was one of the main places for organized fat activism. I'm not going to say it was the only place. There were other places in the world and other places in the US where things were happening other than NAFA, and sometimes in direct response to people thinking NAFA wasn't political enough. Then that's how we get the Fat Underground in the early 70s, which is a fat feminist organization. Please look up the Fat Underground's Fat Manifesto. It is a statement of like, this is what we know about fat oppression and how we're in solidarity with other anti-oppression causes, and how in particular women are oppressed by these lies from the reducing industries, is the term that they used for diet culture. Please look that up, the Fat Manifesto. But anyway, that's not NAFA, but it's more radical. NAFA was was started to support fat people. It was like, a fat admirer and his fat wife. He was like, we need to have something to support. I see my wife going through these job struggles, clothes struggles, self-esteem stuff, whatever. There needs to be something more to support people like her. It's not just me and her in this. This is happening to all the fat people. And so, he started this organization, and over the years it grew into chapters all across the country. Now in 2021, we don't have local chapters of NAFA anymore. We have an all volunteer board that that plans events and activities. Right now we're doing that all digitally, of course, because of the way the world has been for the last year. And the focus for me with being the chair of NAFA, so I'm only the second Black woman to chair NAFA. The first was Phyllis Ward, who was an interim chair for a few months when the board chair died. But I'm the first person that took to take the position with the intention of it being a long-ish term position. I don't want it to be too long because I believe in organizational turnover. That's how you build new leaders. But I'll be here for a minute. And as you could see from this interview, and if you've seen me in other places, I talk about race all the time. So having me as the Black chair is is different than the history of this organization. And so one of the things that we are really trying to work on is increasing the understanding of intersectionality in NAFA's long-term members who are less familiar with those dynamics. And in doing the kind of relationship building you and I have been talking about, where we are working with other fat organizations, co-planning things, supporting the things that they're doing, getting each other's insights, so that we can cover Max Airborne from Fat Rose, the organization I mentioned earlier, talks about it as the ecology of the fat world. So we can cover that full ecology. We have a particular place as an organization in that world as the sort of, the grand elder organization in terms of documented fat rights movement. And I always make a point of saying documented fat rights movement because we know there were badass fat people, doing shit in the world before this organization came along.
Right.
Whether they were doing that individually or collectively, we know especially that in other movements for human rights, particularly Black women in the US civil rights movement, we know that there are fat people just doing badassery of all kinds of political and human things before 1969 when NAFA's founded. But that moment, the founding of NAFA, in 1967, there was an event in New York called the Fat Inn, which was like a gathering in the park and in Central Park. And then there was a publication in the Saturday Evening Post in 1968, and then the founding of NAFA in 69. Those are kind of recognized as the beginnings of the documented, organized fat rights movement. And so as the organization that's been there from the very beginning, I will say shout out to Girth and Mirth, which was a gay men's social organization that started around the same time, that had a little bit more of a social focus than the sort of like personal support and political support that NAFA was trying to do. But like that era, we date back to that era. So we have a different longevity. There are pros and cons to that, but we want to think about how we can leverage the pros of that. And so I know you asked me something when we talked before that made me think a lot. You said, why did you take on something like NAFA instead of and trying to make that more welcoming for people of color instead of just starting something for people of color? First of all, there are other people doing good shit starting people of color things like Fat Women of Color, which, as you said, I've been following, for years, and admired for years. And, and I've done Black and brown centered work, like we talked about with my nightclub. But in this case, I stumbled into NAFA through being invited to do one of their fashion shows at one of their conferences. And I knew the long history because I had seen people from NAFA on Donahue when I was a teenager. And because there was a woman at my college who worked at my college who was a member of NAFA. And I went to her workshop when I was like 18 and learned about fat activism. So I knew some of the history of NAFA. I didn't know some of the more complicated or problematic parts of the history, but I knew some of the legacy. And I want to see how we can leverage that legacy to help more people across a broad spectrum of fat community. And so we really are focused on intersectionality. It is hard to turn a ship that's been sailing for 52 years already.
Yeah.
But I think that we are making some strides in turning it, you know?
And I love that, we had the conversation, but I do respect what you're doing and your goals and how you're pulling together and bringing in that intersectionality. And like you said, trying to turn this old ship in a different direction. As a Black woman, again, we usually have a lot of labor that comes involved with these kind of things, and I
Yeah.
want to just honor you and respect you for doing that and for the work that you are doing with NAFA.
Thank
The
you.
things that you shared here today, for those of you who watch live, thank you for watching. If you're watching the replay, and even if you watch live, go back, rewind, and listen, because you dropped so much information. I feel like people should pay for some of this because it's so much.
Well, if people want to pay for some of this, they can Venmo me. I got all the
Yes,
Cash App,
give
all the
us
things.
that, and we'll put it in the description later. We'll
Okay.
get all your coin links so they can do that, because you gave a lot of education just around what it means, like fat community, fat activism, fat liberation, just how we can cross pollinate, how we can support each other. This was like webinar style information. Um,
It's that
it's
teacher
so
in me.
rich.
I told you I was
Oh, that's
educating
right. You are a
students.
teacher.
But well, the thing is, like, and if people want more of this, one of the things we've done to modernize NAFA is update our website in the last year and add a blog to it. And so there's lots of great stuff on the blog. The events for Fat Liberation Month, May is Fat Liberation Month. This is the first time NAFA has celebrated a Fat Liberation Month and invited people all over the world to join us. That hashtag is Fat Liberation Month. And we've been having webinars all through the first half of this month. We have 6 or 7 more to go. They are free. They include ASL interpreting from Pro Bono ASL, which is also a mostly Black and Brown organization, with some, the other folks that participate are really strong and committed agents of change. And so we love Pro Bono ASL. We're so happy to be working with them now. And you can see all of those events on our on NAFA.org. On social media, NAFA is NAFA official. I am I of the Tigress, like letter I of the Tigress, Tigress. And through the NAFA pages, you'll see lots about our events and things like that. Through my page, you'll see a lot of fat visibility selfies, because I'm into that. I like that as a form of personal activism. And if I can leave folks with anything, is like, keep searching until you find your place in fat community, because the community aspect of it is what will help sustain you in the times when anti-fatness and all the other antis we deal with, anti-Blackness, anti-brownness, anti-Muslim, I'm not going to list all the antis, but you know what they are. Look, if you live in them, you know what they are. Right. And so but fat community will help sustain you. And it's like family. Sometimes we will be fighting amongst ourselves, but in everything I've gone through, when I lost my job, when I had COVID earlier this year, in everything I've gone through since I've been in fat activist community, the activists have shown up for me more than anyone else. Other than like my mom, but like, my best friends. But like, in terms of like folks who know me, kind of know me online or kind of know my work or whatever, the fat people will show out. I lost my job at the high school because I did a fat visibility project that the school knew about, but kind of changed their mind about it. It's a long story, but it involves some semi-nudity. And I lost my job at the high school. And girl, the fat burlesque people were like, you want us to come up there with our titties out? Like, I mean, they like, and so, and they were the folks, fat community were the folks who sustained me through that emotionally and also with practical support.
Yeah.
And we got out there and it was the same year as Juicy Delight's Fat Flash Mob. So I got out there, get out there with these other fat people and dance it off together in the streets. But like, all over my life in the last 15 years or so, I have seen fat communities show up like that.
Yeah.
And in particular, the bonds that I have with other people of color in fat community, have been incredible to me. And also, as much as we can be disappointed by white allies a lot. The ones who I have seen be most consistent in support in my life are ones that started with fat liberation politics or some kind of other anti-oppression activism. And so they have that intersectional lens and they're really genuinely trying to do the work, even if they don't get it right all the time. So
Yeah.
if you haven't found your fat community space yet, first of all, if you're not regularly following fat women of color, please do that. I'm not just saying that because they let me, because Ivy had me on today. I have been following them.
Yes,
I
you have.
accidentally discovered them through a hashtag on Instagram when I was kind of new to Instagram, and have been following them since. And I'm so affirmed by the photos I see and the stories that I hear from the people that y'all feature.
Thank you.
And if it's not NAFA and it's not fat women of color, keep searching till you find it or start something yourself. If you are going to start something yourself, NAFA has a mini grant program where you can apply for up to $500 to start something. I think our next grant cycles will be coming up this summer, so you can keep an eye out for that. And we mostly give you the money and let you do what you do and stay out of it, so you don't have to be doing it the way we would do it.
Yeah.
So think about those kinds of resources, and just if you haven't found your place, build your place.
I love it. You all make sure you follow. Yes, definitely find. We'll put all this in the description. If you're watching the live, we'll put it in the description of the replay so we'll get all the info from Tigress. But make sure you follow her and learn, because it's so, like I said, it's so much wealth of information that you're giving. And from where you started to where you are now, I know we could do a whole nother segment and just like listen and learn and soak up all the things that you're sharing. And I definitely appreciate you being here. I want to go back and watch this again because you said so. It was so many like moments and like for people who are just kind of starting out in fat liberation, and for people who are all in fat liberation, and for people who are creating community in fat liberation, and for people who want to figure out how do I work with other people in fat liberation. So you spoke to all different stages and types of people in fat liberation. And so I really appreciate you for being here. Like I said, we'll put everything in the description so you can connect with her, follow her, also follow NAFA, get in touch with them. Make sure you get support and grants and things like that if you want them and if you need them.
Yeah, and make sure you check out the rest of what we have for Fat Liberation Month. We still have, like I said, I think we have 6 or 7 webinars left to go. They're all free. And then at the end of the month, we're having a fat trivia challenge where you can, answer some questions about fat activist history with a really fun host, and it's interactive. And then a party. At the end of it, we're having a party.
Awesome.
Emma Poundcake is going to be the hostess of the party. I know some of y'all probably follow her. And so, we're going to go carry on through with lots more education for the month. And then we're going to end with a little bit of fun together. So please
go over at party with the, go over, learn, get some wisdom, get connected, network. And then at the end, make sure everybody get over there and party and have a good time.
That's right.
As well. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we say thank you again to our sponsors, which is calabashtea.com. Calabash Tea is in Washington, D.C. And if you go on calabashtea.com, you can order teas, coffee, tinctures, all sorts of healing goods for your body, mind, and soul. And they will give you a 10% discount if you use our code, which is FWOC for Fat Women of Color. And they'll also donate to the Fat Women of Color as well. So we appreciate them for being our sponsor. Thank you to everybody who watched. You can catch the replay on YouTube. It'll be up there soon, so you can catch that as well. And if you have any questions or comments, you can drop those in the comments box, and we'll make sure that we get back to you. And if you have any questions or comments for Tigress, drop it there as well, and we'll make sure that she gets that as well. So thank you all for watching.